for September 18th, 2013. May we have roll call, please?
Commissioner Fish?
Here.
Commissioner Haddad?
Here.
Commissioner Lopez?
Here.
Commissioner Rosso?
Here.
Chairman Georgino?
Here.
Commissioner Cliff?
Here.
Commissioner Haddad?
Here.
Commissioner Nimri?
Here.
Commissioner Redmond?
Here.
Commissioner Stratus?
Here.
Would everyone please rise and move to the Pledge of Allegiance? Ready? Begin.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
We're at item 4, which is public comments. If anyone wishes to address the commission, please fill out a speaker request form indicating the agenda item. We only have one, so that'll make it easy. And submit it to the secretary. There will be a 5-minute time limit for each speaker. Is there anyone who would like to make a public comment?
Move to close public comments.
Second.
Okay, there's a motion and a second. Is everyone in favor? Motion carries. All right, we'll move on to item 5, which is the analysis and recommendations regarding the fixed route transit study. And I believe our Director of Parks and Recreation is going to give us a report.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for coming. I will give a very brief introduction, staff report, and then turn it over to our consultants. As you recall, I'm sure, on July 24th, we had a joint meeting of the Parks and Recreation Commission and the Public Safety Commission to discuss alternatives to the fixed route transit study. At that time, the consultant presented basically two options, a strategic service plan and a constrained service plan. The commissions requested additional information, additional options to be brought back, more in conformance with a budget. And so the consultant has provided, at this time, additional recommendations pursuant to the commission direction. And with that, I'm going to cut mine off and turn it over to our consultants for a presentation.
Well, good evening, everybody. I wanted to come back to you and follow up from the meeting that we had on July 24th to go over some of the transit service options that we had developed. That gives us an opportunity to review some other options that are more associated with some of the comments that we received at the last meeting and some recommendations that we made or will be making from that point. Just a quick background on the study. Fixed route study did begin in January of this year, and the primary purpose was to assess the potential for fixed route service operating within Temple City. Some of the activities that we've undertaken as part of the project was to review some of the key policy documents and plans related to transportation in the city, evaluate the characteristics of the community through census data. We did conduct community outreach and held a community workshop to gather feedback from the community as to some of the unmet transit needs that they saw. And we developed an initial operating plan, which we discussed at the meeting in July. And also, we're looking to identify funding sources and marketing strategies. As Burroughs mentioned, at our meeting on July 24th, we presented two potential options for transit service. One was a strategic plan. It included 3 bus routes that would operate on a 40-minute service frequency. The buses would be routed on one-way loops, and we estimated the strategic plan to have an annual operating cost of a little over $814,000 a year. We also brought back a bit of a less expensive plan we called the constrained plan. There were 2 bus routes, also that operated on a 40-minute service frequency. The routing on those was also a one-way loop, and the annual operating cost that was estimated was about $556,000 a year. At the meeting in July, we did receive comments from the commissioners to take a look at some of the assumptions that we made on the service parameters. A few of the comments that we received, one was to develop possibly one baseline route that could be operated in the city. And also, as part of that comment, there was also a comment to see if that particular route might cost somewhere in the range of $300,000 a year or less. There were also some other comments to look at a phased implementation of additional routes, look at a bit more of a frequency of service, something closer to every 30 minutes instead of every 40 or 60 minutes, to look at the potential of bi-directional service operation instead of one-way loops. We also had comments regarding service on Rosemead Boulevard. One of our proposals had service on Rosemead south of Las Tunas. It was suggested to look at Encinita or Sultana Avenues. And then also to look at relocating a proposed bus staging area that we had proposed on Golden West next to Temple City Park. One of the things that we did and looked at as an approach based on the comments was to look at a 5-phase route implementation plan. And this plan assumed changes in the initial operating assumptions that I just mentioned. The plan would start with the first phase, which would be a baseline bus route that would operate on weekdays only. And then phase 2 would add weekend service to that route. A third phase, actually the third to fifth phases, would start to expand service throughout the city. The third phase would be an additional route in the northwestern area of the city. The fourth phase, an additional route in the southwestern area of the city. And then a fifth phase, which would take the baseline route and extend the route so it serves more of the southeastern area of the city. But what you see before you is a map of the baseline route that we've developed. And as I mentioned, we considered it phases 1 and 2 because it's weekday and weekend service. This particular route will serve the Civic Center area, would serve here at Live Oak Park and the Senior Center. It would serve residential areas along Olive Street and Broadway. Serve the shopping area on Rosemead Boulevard and Las Tunas Drive, and then the downtown corridor, shopping corridor along Las Tunas Drive. The additional phases, as you can see, would start to extend around the remainder of the city. So as I mentioned, there could be additional routes in the northwestern area of the city, the southwestern area, and then an extension of the baseline route over towards the southeastern area of the city. Now actually, following all the parameters that we've had in the previous discussion, we do feel that that particular plan, following those parameters, would be too expensive for the city to operate. In that scenario, you're looking at about 55,000 revenue hours a year. We would estimate you would have about 1 million boardings a year, but the cost annually is about $3.3 million, with revenue generated of about $500,000. And again, that considers 30-minute service, bi-directional service, and so forth. But we wanted to take a look at what all that would mean if we did everything that we had discussed in the previous meeting. So what we would actually recommend to you is something similar to what we talked about in terms of a phased implementation plan and something similar to the service structure that we just showed you. But we would recommend implementing the baseline route with weekday and weekend service. And the operating assumptions for that service would be service frequency every 30 minutes, which is a bit more frequent than our earlier proposals. But we would recommend to operate service just in a clockwise direction, just on a one-way loop. The span of service would be from 7 a.m. to 8 p.m. on weekdays and 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. on weekends. This particular routing would take one bus with one additional bus as a spare bus. And we assumed a 50-cent fare. And one other thing that we proposed was to relocate the bus staging area from Golden West Avenue, actually to have the bus just begin service here at Live Oak Park. Still operate the same routing, it just wouldn't stop and lay over next to Temple City Park. It would lay over here at this location. And any additional routes could do the same. For this particular implementation plan, they estimated the service performance that we would see, it's about 4,600 revenue hours a year. We're assuming close to 70,000 boardings a year. The annual operating cost for the baseline route for weekdays and weekends is about $278,000 a year, and we estimate somewhere close to $35,000 in terms of fare revenue that would be generated. And then, as time went on, if funding became available, the other routes that were included in the proposal could be added in as we go along and expand the system. One of the other things that we looked at, and this is since we had our last meeting, were some of the options in terms of vehicle procurement. And I want to mention that what we have here is a little bit different than what's in your staff report because we had some updated information. But we have been reviewing the availability of vehicles, and we have had discussions with our city staff also about the potential for trolley-style vehicles. And so the options that you have in terms of procurement revolve around either leasing vehicles or purchasing vehicles. And so what we looked at was the cost of a bus that's somewhere close to $135,000 for a vehicle. And we looked at comparing lease versus purchase cost over a 2-year period. To lease a vehicle or 2 buses, that would be one in operation and one spare over a 2-year period, the leasing cost would be about $128,000. To purchase the 2 vehicles would be somewhere close to $270,000 for the 2 buses. But there are pros and cons to each, and some of it depends on what the long-term objective of service would be. Leasing would provide the city an opportunity to operate a service and assess the performance of service over a period of time before you actually commit to purchase of a long-term asset. However, purchasing the buses, if you were looking at being able to use those buses for other services, particularly dial ride, if you operate a service and decided to discontinue it, or if you resold the vehicles in 2 years under our assumption, you could recoup a portion of the cost that was paid out. We estimated a resale value of about $200,000. So that a lot of that depends on where the city's direction would go. If you're looking at potentially a short-term test period in a sense for service, you may want to lease the vehicles before you actually purchase them. But if you know that there's a longer-term lease, longer-term use for the vehicles that you may procure, then you may purchase them because you know you'll be using them, or you could possibly resell them. And in that sense, it might be a little cheaper than leasing. And we did want to provide just a graphic to give you a sense of what a trolley-style bus looks like, and something that's in the local area. City of Los Angeles, LADOT, operates a trolley. I think this one is near the downtown area. And so this is just sort of a sense of a potential type of vehicle that can be looked at if there was a desire to have a trolley-style vehicle operating in the city. So our next steps would be to review any additional comments that this body had and staff on the alternatives that were provided, and then to develop an implementation plan with timelines and milestones that will be submitted to the city in a draft final report. And then after review of that report, we will be submitting a final report to city staff. So I'd be happy to take any questions or comments that you have at this time. Hopefully this did answer some of the questions and thoughts that everyone had.
Thank you, Mr. Goldman. Does anybody have any questions or comments? We could start first with the public safety.
Well, the type of vehicle that we're considering, would those be a standard vehicle or like natural gas or something like that?
Well, that would depend. As I mentioned, like for example, the trolley vehicle would be. I think I'm not sure if that particular one that LADOT operates is natural gas, but there has been a movement away from gasoline operated to other resources. Any other types of vehicles potentially would be some kind of clean energy type fuel.
Thank you.
I want to thank you for your responsiveness to our feedback. It is amazing that you caught so many of the points and applied them to revision. It's very impressive.
Well, thank you. We want to be responsive to help you figure out if you want to move forward and how you can move forward. So I appreciate that.
Do you know where we can get those 2-year-old buses for?
Oh, well, we are looking at, different providers to just get a sense of where vehicles could be procured. That gave one example of a vehicle type that could be procured, but we will have some ideas of where vehicles could come from. A lot of it depends on the type of vehicle again, too. We want to offer some alternatives, whether it be a trolley-style vehicle or a small bus or what's called a cutaway type.
Thank you.
I'd like to echo Commissioner Richards' thanks to you. Consider all the options. Looks like all the options that were presented earlier in the first session. A question regarding lease versus buy. When you're leasing, who's maintaining, and when you buy, who's maintaining those buses?
I think we're assuming either way that if the city moved forward with this, you would have a provider who would operate the services and also store and maintain the services. Just because at this time it didn't seem that the city had the infrastructure to maintain some type of bus. So you probably include that in your overall cost when you have a provider operate your service.
When a bus is purchased, does it include any warranties with it? Maybe 3 years free maintenance from the manufacturer?
That's something I'd have to look at. I mean, I'm sure that there are. I don't know what all the terms are offhand, but I'm sure when you purchase a vehicle, in this manner for use in transit, there's going to be a period where even from the manufacturer, they're going to give you a warranty period. I'm just not sure how long that goes. We will check that, and we can include that in our report.
And would that be connected regarding the maintenance with the per hour rate for the driver?
It would be connected with your overall rate. When I say that, you'll have your operational rate for the driver and any maintenance cost and any administrative costs that go along with that.
So if the warranty comes with the bus, the new bus, then that could be dropped down?
That would be something to consider when you're bidding and discussing proposals with providers. It depends on how much maintenance or how much would be included in a warranty, but certainly that would give you some opportunity for some give and take as to who would be handling that, how much it costs, and so how much you'd be asking someone else to take on to operate and maintain.
Any other questions?
Yeah, just real quick, thank you again for answering all the questions, just like the other commissioner said. I really like this route. I think it's a very positive route. It connects to parks, it connects to schools, and it looks like a shopping center as well. Just one question about the time I saw on the weekdays, I think it ended at 8 p.m. That was what the proposal said. Could we extend that time on special days of special events like concerts in the park? Would that be easy to do?
Yeah, well, what I would recommend at least your standard timing being about 8 o'clock, because if you're kind of looking at it as a baseline route, and then you're going to see how it operates and how late people need it and so forth. Just given what we found in our studies, maybe 8 o'clock was fine on a typical day. But then what's normally done, if you have special events and things of that nature, that's something that you really build in when you're working with your contractor who operates service, so that they know on these particular days, we have late events at Temple City Park or something going on here, and you may be running until 12 o'clock. You can just create a special schedule that would just kind of add on for those ad hoc events.
Right, and that could also be maybe using that spare bus if we have a lot of people. And that whole route says 30 minutes, right? That's what
we're looking at, I think it was about a 24, 25-minute loop, and then give the driver about 5 minutes recovery time, and then start.
I really like that. The last question I have is, I know that LADOT, their dash system, has this app, or you put in the bus number or this bus stop number, and it tells you when the bus is going to get there. Could we implement something like that, similar, so we can know exactly where that bus is on that loop and when we're stopping at a stop, or is that
Well, I have to defer that more to staff. And it's obviously it's doable to do those types of things in theory. It's just more the capabilities of the city and who your provider might be working together.
Thank you very much.
Commissioner Stratus, did you have any questions?
Yes, thank you once again. Can you go back to the one figure where you had the estimated costs, but for the initial plan, not for the overall plan?
Would that be for the
annual cost?
The annual cost for the 5 phases?
Not for the 5 phases, just for the initial one.
Oh, for the one we discussed previously?
There we go, right there.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Okay, so if it's going to cost the city about $278,000, we're only taking about $34,000, and I don't know if you can answer this question, but Kathy, that means the city would have to come up with about $240,000 just to operate this, correct? And that's annually, and that's only for the first phase. And I don't want to be a naysayer, because I'm all for change and doing something great for our residents, but that's a lot of money annually the city has to put out, correct?
And I can address that to some extent. We have, well, let me put it this way. In this fiscal year's budget, we have budgeted $100,000 just to put a placeholder in for the fixed route transit. We have about 60,000 additional funds left in our regular. So we have in this year's budget about 160,000, which would probably be enough if we wanted to start it this year because it wouldn't be for a full year. However, with that being said, the problem's going to come in the next couple of years, and if we weren't committing our excess monies to Rosemead Boulevard and Las Tunas, we would have extra money to look at this. But what I want to caution the commissions is, at this point, you need to consider the financial aspect, but that should not be your sole consideration. That's going to have to be council's decision. If they want to do this, then they're going to have to look for the money somewhere. We do have some Prop A funds that could probably cover half of the cost. The other half would have to be some other funding, either general fund or, free up some of the excess Prop A or Prop C monies that are committed to the Rosemead Boulevard and Las Tunas. So if you're looking at, right now, could we pay for it with just our regular operating monies? No. We can't. But if the commissions think that it's still something that the council should pursue, then you should make that recommendation. The other thing I wanted to point out to the body is that, and Tanya is actually really good, we will be soliciting proposals for our dial-a-ride and RFP for our dial-a-ride services next spring. And if this body and the council agree that let's at least move forward and get cost on it, we can include the fixed transit in that RFP. Nothing lost, nothing gained. We get the cost. If we can't afford it, then we at least know what it is, or we've looked at it. If the costs come in a little bit better because, they're doing both dial-a-ride and the contractor's doing both dial-a-ride and fixed route, we may get some economies of scale. It may work out. So I think the timing is really good. If the commissions and the council decide to move forward with the fixed route, one of the recommendations that have been proposed, then my recommendation would be that we fold it into our RFP in the spring for our dial-a-ride and fixed route services.
Thank you. And thank you, that's all I have.
Any other questions?
I actually do have one.
Go ahead.
The only revenue you calculated is fare revenue.
Yes.
Do you have any idea what advertising revenue might be on?
I really couldn't say offhand what that may be. I can give you some sense that, in a scenario, say maybe where you had a wrapped vehicle or something like that. And keep in mind, if you ended up looking at something like a trolley or something that had a distinctive style, you might have limits on how much space you have to advertise. But you could generate some revenue, but I don't think it would be likely, as much as your fare box revenue. So, it could be, and I'm just using sort of figures from my past knowledge, but, service like, maybe $10,000 or something like that, $5,000, $8,000. So it could help offset some of the costs as well. But usually what you're looking at is what you assume your ridership would be, what your fare would be, and so forth, as at least some offset. And so we looked at, it is a limited route. We think it serves some of the key areas of the city, but it doesn't serve all over the city, that one particular route. So we're assuming maybe about 10 to 15 boardings an hour, and that generates the amount of fare box revenue that we consider.
Okay, Parks and Recreation Commissioners?
Sorry. How much would the startup cost be for phase one, and how would that vary during the phases? How would that change?
For phase one?
For phase one, and then as it progresses to the different phases, I'm assuming that when you implement the various phases, there's going to be a need for additional benches and signages when you add the routes. So I don't know if you've already calculated or estimated the cost to start out for the first phase, and then how that progresses to the different phases.
We just had most of the operating costs right now. We haven't added in all the capital costs in terms of benches and stops and so forth. And we will have some estimates with that as we develop the draft report. And since we had sort of two alternatives, I give you a sense of, from the baseline route that we're recommending, we're looking at something about $278,000 for operating, and then there are costs for procuring the vehicles in some manner, like lease or purchase, and you saw some of the costs associated with that. So there would be some more cost on the capital side for benches and the like. I don't want to just talk off the top of my head what that may be, but it's not as much as the operating cost, but it is some additional cost. So that would be considered, what we're recommending is really a phase one. And we call it phase 1 and 2 in our first look, but it's weekday and weekend service. As you expand out, and if you operated these other routes every 30 minutes, as we're saying, and maybe just on one-way loops instead of the bi-directional service, you're looking at, because those routes are a bit longer than the baseline route, but there's still, each of them is in the $300,000 range annually to operate, and then some additional costs for vehicles and some additional costs for capital. So it's kind of similar with each phase. I mean, you're probably, overall, you're looking at a cost, if you really expanded this all out, of maybe about $1.2 million if you operated in that manner, and then the cost to procure the vehicles and so forth.
Are you saying 1.2 for phase one?
No. That I'm saying if you expanded this out. And so phase 1, I mean, you're looking at the $278,000, and then some cost for the vehicles. And again, if you purchase, it's another roughly $267,000 for purchasing two vehicles. If you're leasing, then you're looking at more of a monthly cost in terms of the vehicle. So that's much reduced with that, and then some additional costs for capital. So you are looking in the $300,000, a little bit more than $300,000 range if you lease, and maybe more like $500,000 the first year if you purchase, because you bought your buses.
And then my second question is, when are you recommending that we implement these different phases? Are there milestones that you've already recommended to us? Or?
No. Our recommendation would be based on funding availability. That you would start with a baseline route and operate that, and if additional funds became available for operating, particularly through Prop A, Proposition A, Prop C, Measure R funds, or any other funds that may come in the future related to transportation, but those three are your major funding sources. If you had additional funds, it could be as you have other projects wrapping up that you're using it on Rosemead and Las Tunas, and you decided this baseline service works well, we'd like to add another phase, and in 2 years when those projects end, there may be money to move over towards operation. It would be in that manner, but I don't think we put a date on any of the phases, because really it would be based on the funding the city has.
Thank you.
You gave us an estimate about the trolleys, how much they would cost. Do we have an estimate that we just use regular buses or the short
There's not a huge difference. I mean, the trolleys are a bit more expensive, but you're still in the, in the $100,000 plus range for smaller vehicles, or what we're calling it cutaways. Trolleys, like, again, because they're more of a specialty vehicle, a bit more, but still the price range is the same.
Okay, and then I have one last question. I noticed here that we're possibly going to get some figures on extending the download program. Extend?
That's fine.
That's yours? Okay, sorry.
One of the things that we wanted to just throw out there, and again, when we do our RFP, we can include any, all, or some of these options, was if the commissions were concerned about the cost and felt that, well, we might not really have enough ridership to justify a fixed route, then maybe we could do maybe a hybrid or a different type of dial ride program. For instance, City of Arcadia has a general population dial ride that it's on demand only, no reservations, and it's basically kind of almost like a taxi service, but you call, if they're available, they come pick you up, they'll take you anywhere in the city, but they won't go outside of the city. And it's for all ages. So we could look at that as an option to, possibly do something similar along those lines. Our current dial ride is for only seniors or disabled persons, so if we added another type of program that would only go in Temple City for all populations, then that might be another option to deal with the difference we have or the need in the transportation programs. So it's just another thought out there. We wanted to give you a couple of different options and scenarios. Whether it would work or what the cost would be, we don't know yet, but it would likely be less than a fixed route, only in that it would be more along the lines of a dial ride and not a fixed route. So I will tell you right now, and our current dial ride provider, our hourly rate is somewhere in the range of $45 to $50 an hour. And so you could carry that out, assuming it would be something comparable along those lines, and figure out how much it would cost. But it would, I don't know what the cost would be at this point, but that's something that if you wanted to, we could pursue a little bit further, or include that as an option in the RFP. When I'm talking about the RFP process, there's several ways we can go about it, and probably the easiest or the best would be to list, different options as alternates. And the companies would bid and give us a quote on the different options, making it very clear that we would be selecting 1, 2, or 3, not necessarily all of them. And I know Diversified has done RFPs for several cities in the past and have indicated they would be willing to work with us in a future phase on developing our RFP. So, at this point, what we'd like to get is, some ideas from the commissioners where we want to go from this, what you want to recommend to the council, and hoping that the direction we get from both you and the council is to, hey, let's put this out in a bid document and see what we get. So whichever options you want to pick and choose, and it could be the strategic service plan that was presented to start with, it could be a combination.
Well, I just had a comment. I like the idea of a trolley only because it goes back to Temple City's history with the Red Club. So I think that's a great idea. I like that idea. You talked about other funding sources. Is there somebody in the city already looking at funding sources? I don't know what kind of grants or things are available. Is there somebody doing that already?
Well, we have been, as part of this project, looking at other sources. Honestly, at this point, and probably not surprisingly, sources for operations are pretty limited. And that's why it really, right now, comes back to the Prop 8. I'm seeing that there are funds. We have identified, or at least potential sources of funds for vehicle purchases, and we'll include that in our report. It's traditionally been easier to get a bus than it is to run a bus, and so there are at least places to look where funds might be available for procurement, but you're kind of right now dealing with what the city has available within your transportation dollars for operations.
I have another question. On on one of the screens you had an estimate of how many riders you would have.
Yeah.
Did you get that? Where did you get that figure from? Is that from?
Well, some of it is from our own professional experience, but also by looking at some of the operations in the area. We looked at Rosemead and looked at El Monte in particular. We had done some work a couple of years ago with El Monte, so we had sort of a sense of what their ridership was. Then we looked at other local operators just to get a feeling of what ridership would be. Our normal sense would be, and we look at it, as I mentioned, per hour of operation. Normally, a service like this would strive to have ridership of about 20 boardings an hour. That would be pretty consistent with El Monte. In fact, they're a bit over 20 boardings an hour on their service. I think about 25 boardings an hour. Where Rosemead, I think, was somewhere more in the 15 boardings an hour range. So in our initial proposals, because those services really span throughout the city and hit a lot of different activity centers, we did look at about 20 boardings an hour in our proposals as well, where we came up with revenue for ridership. Now that we've kind of scaled back, as I mentioned, to more of a baseline route, while it does serve some of the generators, that one route doesn't go all over the city. So that's why we scaled back maybe somewhere closer to Rosemead type of service and looked at about 15 boardings an hour. And you would expect, if that service worked well and you started to expand service, you would then work your way up to a higher level of boardings per hour.
Now, does the boarding per hour, will it increase once the route, once it becomes more popular? Not just, expanding it, so just once people find out about it, will it increase?
That's a possibility. That's a possibility as well. And again, this is our estimate that we're providing you, based on our experience. But that's what you would hope, that if indeed, what you probably would see, and this is, I even say best case scenario, is, once you started a service, you may not have everyone running to it on day one, because people, you would market it and you would promote it, but people still need to know that it's out there. So you might have somewhere more like 10 boardings an hour in the beginning. As people get to know it, as people see where it can take them, it starts to work its way up to where we kind of see it leveling out maybe about 15 boardings an hour. But if it's serving places that people want to go at the times they want to go, they can get to it, it's convenient, there's the potential even for that one route to increase its level of boardings as well without even expanding the system. We took a bit more conservative view. I mean, we wanted to give you a feel of what a service could be, but we didn't want to overhype it in a sense and say, oh, you're going to get, it's going to be flying out of the window. We don't want to do that. We want to give you a fair sense of at least how we think it could operate what we do in the city. So we kind of took a big point of view.
If I could just ask Kathy something. Kathy, this idea came out of the council, right, where they wanted to improve the Los Tunas downtown area. That's from what I understood.
Well, there were a couple of reasons why we looked at this. One was, a couple of them were studies that the Public Safety Commission looked at, your downtown parking and the traffic calming studies. Both of those recommended or suggested that a fixed route shuttle may assist with the problems we're having. So that was part of it. Part of it was from the Parks and Rec side. We had heard comments that the dial-a-ride wasn't meeting everyone's needs. There were either students or people that weren't eligible for dial-a-ride that could not get transportation. And so the council directed us to look at a fixed route program. The main reason was to serve the downtown area and the commercial corridors, but also to address some of the other issues that we talked about. So there were a couple of reasons.
Mr. Goldman, I just wanted to thank you for hearing our input at the last meeting and then coming back with the plan that reflected our comments. I'm much more comfortable with this current plan that you're proposing. So at this point, I'd like to open it up if any of the commissioners have a recommendation they'd like to pursue.
You might ask the person.
Oh, okay. Any public comment before we move on?
just a general question. Can bikes go on this? On the trolley? On the bike racks in front or like on the buses and that?
I would just say it is possible. So I think a lot of it is just how the trolley itself is designed, and if it has a, I guess you call it a cow catcher or something on it. But given, the desire to have people be able to use bikes to make part of their trip, there are options to make sure the trolley can accommodate us.
Anyone else?
I have a question. I don't know a whole lot about buses, but it seems to me when you buy a car, you lose quite a bit of the value in 2 years. And I'm estimating that you're only losing 32% of the value of these buses. So the residual value is still over $200,000. So is it different on buses, or is that normal?
Well, I think that's normal based on some past experience with lease versus purchase on buses. I don't know how different, I really couldn't answer how different it is from a regular automobile, but one, the potential use, I think, of a bus, and particularly in such a short period of time, if you were to resell it, there is a market out there where people would repurchase vehicles, buses, and could use them. So I think that will affect some of the resale value.
So
And it's really hard, it would be a little hard for me to compare it just with a car, but that's some of the reasons behind it.
So the lease would be $128,000 per year or 2 years for 2 buses?
That was
two
buses over 2 years.
2 buses over 2 years. So if you bought the buses, your estimation is that it would be a better deal to buy the buses if you can resell it for that amount?
It would be. And that's where it came back to, I think, what the long-term or longer-term plans for the vehicles are. If you were going to implement a service like this and you knew, we're going to run this service for a period of time, good period of time, or, also, even if we didn't run the service, we're going to use these buses for other uses, and we just assume dollar ride. If you had the funding available, it's better to go ahead and purchase from that standpoint. If you really just knew it's a short-term thing, or there's a potential like we might do this and pull the plug after 2 years, then you might be saving to just lease them for a short period of time. But anything beyond that, you start to flip over to where a purchase is more advantageous.
At the meeting in July, there was a lot of comments of people that want to go to Sam's Club. They want to go every place else except Temple City. They want to take the sales tax dollars out of Temple City. So that idea is completely scrapped now. I mean, it's just basically all within the boundaries of Temple City and no more.
Well, our recommendation right now is really this particular routing. We would recommend, if there was a desire to go to some of the other locations, I know some of them are just outside the city, you could expand the service. But right now, that particular baseline route seemed to fit the goals of what the city was doing.
Thank you.
What was the seating capacity for the bus or the trolley that you used for this study?
I can tell you quickly. Uh, 29 passenger vehicles or 23 passengers in 2 wheelchairs.
Any other one? Any other public input?
I was just commenting that on the buses, the city has seats that hold up to that room for the wheelchairs. It's not like we've got empty space. Okay, does anybody have a recommendation in that?
I have a quick question for the recommendation possibly also. You mentioned the staging area is going to be in the parking lot right here?
It could,
location?
I would say likely on the street, just to keep a bus from coming through the parking lot. It's a bit narrow for even a small bus, but maybe just right out front on the street in front of the park.
how would that be different from other stops location around the route?
Well, I mean, it's really, from what we were recommending before, it's really just a matter of where you start and end your service. And so, you know, the difference that we saw, I know there were comments about the proximity, say, with some of the apartments on Golden West, and there was some discussion of maybe looking at Woodruff as a potential staging area. We did look at that, and we spoke to city staff, and we kind of thought too that maybe this location might be more optimal because it's the park, the senior center. Doesn't affect the routing, it's just when you get over to the civic center area, the bus doesn't park there. It would just serve a stop or a series of stops there. But then it would come here for a driver to take a break or use the restroom and continue the trip. So that's the biggest difference, really just where the bus parks between their trips.
And those stops going to be identified by sign, for example, or
Yes.
bus pads?
Yeah.
Bus
Well,
pads?
well, by signs, at least by signs. I think because so much of the route goes through neighborhoods and you're talking about smaller vehicles, I don't think you're really looking at tearing up the streets and putting bus pads unless you thought the vehicles would be tearing up the streets. And I don't think smaller vehicles, and for the level of service, one vehicle operating somewhat, infrequently compared to your regional services would cause you to do that.
I do have a recommendation is, I do like phase 1 and 2 going together, even though I don't like subsidy. I mean, I like it to be all subsidized. Because 50 cents might deter people till the trial period, comes in place, and we can determine whether, it's successful or not that way. And I'm not yet looking into the other phases yet because we kind of like did not, we ignored the routes at this point, and they do lots of overlapping in a few of them. So I would recommend in my case, phase 1 and phase 2 with the trolley bus as leasing. I'm leaning towards leasing at this point because after 3 years, the update of those buses might be better if we're going to lease them further. They'll be upgraded and newer per se. And I do like the 30-minute routes, of course. And I did hear that you're changing the per hour riders, 15. They were 20 in the past. Now they're 15 per hour.
Yeah, that was our assumption on what ridership would be, and as I was mentioning, just because this particular route is more limited than the more expanded service that we had presented before, so we would just assume maybe there'd be a bit lower level of ridership on one route as opposed to the routes to expand throughout the city.
So again, I would recommend phase 1 and 2, and to look at the other phases when time comes separately at that point. Thank you.
Is that a motion?
No, that's it.
Madam Chairman, I thought of one more question. Could I ask it?
Sure.
Would there be any grant benefit if we've got a clean burning vehicle or a hybrid, or do they make such a thing?
The possibilities are there. There are some opportunities. I think it was mentioned we did have some places that we're looking at. One of them, there's potential grants for clean fuel vehicles, and so that would be something that we'd be seeing if that might be available.
Okay, thank you.
Any areas, like as I mentioned, there's usually more leeway to actually buy or lease a bus than it is for the operation of the bus. So they have more programs and so forth, depending on the types of vehicles that you use, particularly clean fuel vehicles.
Okay, thank you.
No, it wasn't. No, it wasn't. Is this a recommendation of the city council?
I'm sorry.
Is this a recommendation that we make to the city council?
Yes, your recommendation is not necessarily going to go to council as a recommendation, but it will be included in their final report. So in other words, their final report will say the Parks and Recreation and the Public Safety Commissions have their different options, and their recommendations are preferred option is X, Y, Z, or not enable out of nothing. So when it goes to council, it will not be recommendation from commissions. But it's a recommendation, but it's a formal recommendation. I don't know how to go with this.
Will this same presentation that we received be presented to the council exactly as it was presented?
If that is what you're recommending, then that is likely what they will be presenting with some additional information. They're still looking at other funding sources, so there'll be additional information that will be included. The staff report will include the minutes from this meeting, obviously, and your recommendations, as well as the discussions and, the issues and concerns that there are in the commissions.
I don't have a problem with that. I'm not sure if it's a recommendation or motion. As long as we can add to it that I would like to get more information on standard dial ride.
More information on
expanding the dial ride, the cost, as opposed to implementing this program.
Then I would, if I could suggest a
Okay, I don't know how you.
Well, I think I would do a couple motions. One, if you like the option that Diversified has provided, the recommended implementation plan, which in essence combines phases 1 and 2, but at a reduced level with only one-way service and two-way service, then one recommendation, one option would be to recommend to council that they consider the recommended implementation plan as presented tonight. And then the other could be to direct staff to, when soliciting proposals for dial-a-ride, is to include an option for a general service, general population dial-a-ride as well. So it's two.
So will both of these be included in one report that goes to the city council so that they can compare?
Diversified may not include the dial-a-ride option, but we will include that in the staff report.
Okay, but so they will be presented together?
Yes.
That's what I'm saying,
Yes.
for comparison.
Right.
I mean, not from them. I understand that they're going to present the phase 1 and phase 2.
Yes.
But are we going to, can we also include?
Yes.
Okay, do you understand that?
Yes, we will do that. Yes.
And I think, maybe
that
to
motion
echo
was.
what Kathy was saying, we may, I know she mentioned potentially putting out in the RFP for the dial ride, an option, and that would give you a better sense of what that cost actually would be on the market. So, you may have an estimated cost now, but if you went forward at least to get bids, you could get a sense of what providers would tell you they could do that type of service within the dial ride, and also compare it to just a straight fixed price service.
And the other thing, Commissioner Fish, that we could do between the time now and when it goes to council is contact our current provider just to get an estimate from them to find out if it's doable. There could be issues that we're not thinking of right now.
Right,
Maybe
exactly.
dispatch could be a total mess.
I was thinking
We can at least throw it out there and get some.
Right, you already have it in place, and how much would it cost you just to get two extra vehicles and make them more accessible to the public and not have restrictions? That may be, that may solve our problem, but I don't know. And cost-wise, it could be considerably less, because we don't have the startup, we don't have to buy vehicles, we don't have, so that's why I would like to see those.
Then I would make two motions. One motion to pursue this, if you want us to still pursue this, and then the other is to also pursue general alternatives.
I have a question for the motion. I mean, if we go with what the report mentioned, that means we agree to all of the content. And what I recommended earlier, just let's go with phase 1 and 2 if the commissions agree that's first option first. Then when it comes time to implement the other ones as they stand, they can be presented again for us to look further into those strategies. Because I don't think we spent any time on that area. I just see the lines and, I have the few pages on it.
Well, if it helps, at this time, at least, our recommendation to use would be to implement phase 1 and 2, weekday, weekend service. The other phases are really, they give you a sense of where you could serve if you decided to look into that later. But we're not recommending right now to pursue those, but we would offer them in the report as areas that you could look at if you were going to expand your service. But our primary recommendation is really the baseline route.
Would the motion include the type of bus that will be planned to the council? Or would that be the council's decision when it comes up?
I'm sorry.
The type of bus, whether it's a trolley bus or...
I don't know that you necessarily need to get into that at this point. If you have if you feel strongly that it should be alternate fuel vehicle or a trolley type, then absolutely include that in your recommendation. And just as a follow-up, and Mr. Goldman, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe what's going to council is the entire package that you've already heard. So your strategic plan option, the constrained option, and these options, I believe, are all going to be provided to the council.
We'd like
your final report?
to, at least in our report, give them everything that we've looked at. And we've worked our way based on your input and based on working with staff to what we would recommend as, the direction for them to pursue. But we think it's fair that they see there have been various options and they may be interested in looking at those, but at least they see the whole picture and how it has worked to our recommendation.
I have a question. Okay. If we vote as a commissioner to make this recommendation, we're saying that we want the city council to just look at it, not to implement it.
To consider.
Well, basically what you're saying is that
I don't really want to implement it without the information of the dialogue. Does that make sense? I don't do, but I don't want to say, I want you to do this, but then turn around and make another motion and say, but I want you to look at this information.
all I can tell you is in the staff report, when this eventually goes to council, is my recommendation in the staff report, to the council will be to not implement it immediately, but to solicit proposals for all the options, any or all of the options.
Okay.
So if the council at that time says, well, we're not interested in expanding dial ride, but we want you to solicit proposals for this, then we would do that. Either way, we have to solicit proposals for this program. We can't just say, here's the money, let's start up right now. We have to solicit proposals. And since we're already soliciting proposals for dial ride, it doesn't make sense to do two separate ones in the spring. Now, the only way I would say that wouldn't happen is the council says, you know what, we don't have the money right now, we don't even want to pursue it at this point, we're not doing anything further. In which case, we would still go along and solicit proposals for dial ride, and it could be other options as well.
Expanding.
It's what?
Expanding.
Yes.
Okay, I understand.
Madam Chairman, I want to point out, I don't think we closed public comments yet, and we have somebody that was spoken.
Is there anybody who would like to make a public comment before we start with our motions?
I'm here for the Parks and Recs Commission.
Never regular.
Okay, so how about a motion to close public input? Second. Okay, are there any objections? Okay, so ordered. And we'll move along to our, anybody have a motion they want to make?
I move to approve the recommendation as submitted by Diversified.
Okay, is there any discussion on that motion?
I would like for us to somehow, as a joint commission, endorse phase 1 and 2 as the preferred plan to move forward.
Isn't that the recommendation? That is the
That-
recommendation.
So that would be part of that?
That is.
Okay.
So maybe we could clarify that in the motion that includes phase 1 and 2 as recommended by the consultant.
Even though it doesn't mention any time lapse between the phases.
And if it insists, in your motion, it was presented tonight. One scenario was a phase 1, phase 2 with weekend service, and then the other 3 phases. That was just one scenario. What we worked into is it's phase 1 and 2, but when we put the report together, basically a baseline route.
Yeah, phase
So we'll
1 is
just be calling
weekday,
it-
phase 2 is weekend.
Yeah, so we'll just be calling it the baseline route from that point.
Any more discussion? Can we get a roll call vote, please?
Commissioner Fish? Yes. Commissioner Lopez?
Yes.
Commissioner Musso? Yes. Commissioner Haddad?
Yes.
Chairman Georgino?
Yes.
Commissioner Cliff?
Yes.
Commissioner Haddad?
Yes.
Commissioner Nimri?
Yes.
Commissioner Redmond?
Yes.
Commissioner Stratus?
Yes.
Motion passes. Are there any other motions?
I'd like to make a motion for the city council to review
consider expanding the Alright program as well.
As an alternate.
Second.
Okay, is there discussion on that motion? Did everybody hear that? Okay. Any discussion on that? Any questions?
Could this be in conjunction with what we're looking at right now? Would that be something separate as far as looking at dial right? You know, would dial right be its own study
It would be-
versus a fixed route?
It would just be, if the council wants us to look at another option, in other words, if they're thinking that this might be too much, maybe we should look at that option, then it's just an option. So it would not impact our existing dial right, that would not be changed at all, but it would add another level of service.
So at this time, we'll be looking at it and would be just suggesting that that would be
Yes.
the way to go.
Yes.
That answers my question.
Any more questions? Can we have a roll call vote on that one also, please?
Okay, Commissioner Fish?
Yes.
Commissioner Lopez?
Yes.
Commissioner Rosa?
Yes.
Commissioner Haddad?
Yes.
Chairman Georgina?
Yes.
Commissioner Fix?
Yes.
Commissioner Haddad?
Yes.
Commissioner Newbury?
Yes.
Commissioner Redmond?
Yes.
Commissioner Strange?
Yes.
That motion passes also. Are there any other recommendations that would like to be made?
I just want to make sure that what we mentioned here to be in the report, for example, what I mentioned regarding maybe subsidize the whole operation at the beginning at least to increase the ridership, then serving the riders, even though 50 cents is not that much, but they might just say, I gotta use it. So as long as it's within the report as an option, and to offset that operational revenue, I would recommend probably offset it with pay hour rates, possible.
Well, I mean, one thing we could mention in the report, certainly in terms of marketing of service or marketing strategies, one scenario is always, free fare period or reduced fare period or something like that. And you could see the potential impact then would be instead of the fare revenue you generate, you wouldn't generate that revenue or some portion of it depending on how long you did that. So certainly that's a marketing strategy we could reference in the report. When you mentioned offsetting that with pay or is that what you?
Yes.
I think that would be something more. That would be something more that someone who may bid on that would probably certainly they have an interest in that. That just from experience, my own experience, that might be kind of difficult as a source for the firm that you're asking to operate the service to reduce their rate or something. But you can always ask. I mean, that's something that you've got to talk
Could
to
be an
the
option to use rate or Vice Chairman recommended advertising revenue.
Or, and there may be other sources, just in that scenario, the city may say, well, we have, these dollars that could offset, some of that cost, for example, or you could, look at, if you had a reduced rate, we're estimating a cost of about $60 an hour. So if your bids came in at a lower rate, your cost of service is less, so that starts to affect the dynamic as well. That may go along the way of where you're going, in that you ended up with a lower cost for the service than you anticipated, and it does help you to be able to maybe offer a lower fare. Some of that you won't find out until you go forward, but we certainly can reference
That's something to consider.
the potential of free and reduced fares to help stimulate ridership.
Thank you.
Are there any other recommendations?
Any recommendations about leasing versus buying the commissions?
For our consultant to include in the final report.
I haven't heard from the commission about whether to lease or buy.
Personally, I think probably more of a decision made by the council for the expenditure fund.
Then if there aren't any more recommendations to be made, we're at adjournment, item 6. Someone like to make a motion to adjourn?
Sure, I'll move to adjourn the meeting.
Second.
All in favor? Meeting is adjourned. Thank you very much. Also, we have another meeting coming up.